Toma.
Okay, let's dive in. We're talking about something today that, well, it feels increasingly essential in just about any business context now, how people from different cultures actually manage to work together effectively.
Yeah. And we've got some really interesting sources here that paint a clear picture of why this matters so much right now.
Absolutely. And looking through them, there seem to be like two big drivers pushing this front and center.
That's right. The first one is it's happening right on your doorstep, basically. Workforces locally they're way more diverse than they used to be.
So you've got folks working side by side with really different backgrounds, different ethnicities, life experiences. It all comes together in the office or on the factory floor.
Exactly. And then the second driver is, well, it's global. It's the fact that you're just much more likely now to be working with colleagues internationally.
Right. Either because you're traveling or maybe more commonly you're on Zoom calls, Slack channels.
Yeah, exactly. Connecting online with teams spread across, maybe several different countries. Technology makes it easy to connect. But those underlying cultural differences, they don't just disappear.
So the sources seem pretty unanimous on this. If you don't pay attention to this stuff, it's going to cost you. It hits effectiveness.
Oh, absolutely. It really impacts how well things get done. When expectations clash because of cultural misunderstandings, even subtle ones, projects can really slow down.
Or just grind to a halt.
Or even fail completely. It can undermine strategy, cost a lot of money. It's often a kind of hidden drag on performance that companies maybe don't always track back to cultural factors.
Okay. And there's a term for sort of the skill set needed here, right? The sources call it.
Cultural intelligence, yeah. It's more than just knowing trivia about other countries. It's about having the awareness, the adaptability to actually function well when you're interacting with people from different cultural backgrounds.
Got it. So the plan for this deep dive then is to kind of unpack that, look at your sources, get really specific about where these friction points pop up at work, and maybe most importantly, figure out how you can build that cultural intelligence yourself.
Right. So let's talk about the core issue. The sources really frame it around differing expectations, don't they?
Yeah, it seems like the fundamental problem is that we all carry around these like default settings based on our own culture, how we communicate, how we approach tasks.
Exactly. And when your default settings clash with your team members' defaults, well, that's where the inefficiency and, frankly, the frustration can creep in.
And some of these differences are maybe more obvious, things you can almost see or feel, like physical space.
That's a classic one.
Yeah.
How close do you stand when you're talking to someone? What feels like a normal, respectful distance in one culture might feel really intrusive, kind of pushy in another.
Or the opposite, right? Someone might seem cold or distant just because they're maintaining what they feel is appropriate space.
Precisely. And these little things, the sources point out, they can create instant, maybe even unconscious feelings of discomfort or bias if you're not aware that norms just vary.
Okay, and what about greetings, handshakes, bowing, the cheek kissing thing in some places?
Yeah, that's another one where you really need to know the local custom, especially in business, what's expected, what's definitely not okay. Getting that wrong can make a bad first impression.
There was that specific example in the sources about business cards in Japan. That really stood out to me.
Oh yeah, that's a powerful one. Because it's not just about exchanging contact info. The card itself is treated with a certain level of respect. It's seen almost as an extension of the person.
Right. And the source said just like taking it, glancing quickly, and stuffing it in your back pocket without really acknowledging it.
Yeah.
That's seen as pretty disrespectful.
Deeply disrespectful in that context, yeah. You're expected to receive it carefully, read it, maybe comment on it, treat it with care. It's a small action, but it shows you understand and respect their norms. Ignoring that can cause real offense completely unintentionally.
Okay, so that's a good bridge, actually, because that example shows the impact of these differences. But the sources also stress that it's often the less obvious stuff, the sort of hidden cultural currents that really affect how projects go.
Exactly. Beyond the handshakes and personal space, there are deeper things like how do people view time?
Yeah. Time management. Is being on time for a meeting mean exactly 9:00 a.m. or is 9:00, 9:00 no okay?
Right, or deadlines. Is a deadline a fixed, immutable point in time? Or is it more like a target that everyone understands might shift a bit? Those different perspectives can cause huge problems if they aren't surfaced and discussed. Misunderstandings, missed handoffs.
And what about hierarchy? The relationship between senior and junior people.
Oh, that's a big one the sources highlight. How much deference is expected? In some cultures, a junior person directly questioning a senior manager's plan in a meeting would be, well, unthinkable.
Whereas in others, that might be seen as showing initiative, right?
Exactly. Or even just speaking up without being directly asked. The norms around who speaks when, how directly you can challenge ideas, how feedback is given, it varies enormously based on cultural attitudes towards hierarchy and authority.
Which kind of leads perfectly into this idea of unwritten rules that the sources mention.
Yes. Every workplace, every team has them. They're the unspoken agreements, the ways things really work, regardless of what the org chart says.
Like how decisions actually get made behind the scenes, or who you really need to convince to get something done.
Precisely. Or, is it better to send an email or walk over and talk to someone? How is bad news delivered? How is praise given? These are often learned through osmosis if you grew up in that culture or have been there a long time.
But if you're new or from a different cultural background, you can easily trip over these rules without even knowing they exist. The sources were clear. You could be technically brilliant, but still struggle because you keep unintentionally stepping on toes.
You offend people, or maybe you just don't get included because you're not playing by the invisible rules. It can be really isolating and hinder your effectiveness.
Okay, so it's complex. How do the sources suggest you actually start to build this cultural intelligence? How do you get better at navigating all this?
Well, they lay out a kind of two-step process, fundamentally.
And interestingly, the first step isn't about looking outwards, it's about looking inwards, by thinking about your own culture first.
Exactly. That's often the missing piece.
Yeah.
You need to do some self-reflection. How do you typically operate? What are your assumptions about how work should be done?
Like, how direct am I usually? How much small talk do I expect before getting down to business? What are my instinctive reactions when someone communicates differently?
And crucially, part of that is identifying the unwritten rules in your familiar environments. What are things you do automatically that might seem totally weird or confusing to someone from outside? Understanding your own cultural baggage, so to speak, is key.
Okay, so start with self-awareness. Then what's step 2?
Step 2 is then turning your attention outwards. Actively learning about other cultures. But, and this is important, doing it with an open mind. The sources stress recognizing that your way isn't the only way or even the right way. There are many paths to the same goal.
And how do you practically learn? Just read books.
That can help, sure. But the sources really emphasize direct observation and engagement. Pay attention. Watch how people interact in meetings, how they handle disagreements, how they build relationships.
Be observant. Got it.
And the other big one is just ask. Ask questions. Most people, the sources suggest, are actually very happy to talk about their culture if you approach it with genuine curiosity and respect.
Right. Showing you want to understand goes a long way, doesn't it? It builds bridges rather than walls.
Absolutely. That willingness to learn is often really appreciated.
Now, there was a really important warning attached to this learning about others part in the material, a major pitfall.
Yes, a really critical one. Avoid stereotyping.
So knowing general tendencies is one thing, but assuming every single person from culture X will behave exactly according to that tendency, that's the trap.
Precisely. Learning that, say, culture X generally values indirect communication is useful context. But it does not mean that Sarah, your colleague from culture X, will always be indirect. She's an individual. She might be very direct.
Yeah, you can't just apply a broad cultural label and think you understand the person in front of you.
Absolutely not. The sources make the point that there's huge diversity within any culture, just like within your own. Think about the range of personalities and communication styles just within your own family or close friends. Applying a stereotype blinds you to the actual person.
So use the general knowledge as a starting point, maybe? As a hypothesis generator, but then pay attention to the individual.
Exactly. It's about holding that cultural knowledge lightly, using it as a guide, but staying curious and observant about the specific human being you're interacting with.
Okay, so wrapping this up then. The takeaway from this deep dive seems clear. Getting better at working across cultures isn't just a nice to have anymore. It's pretty critical for actually getting things done effectively in business today.
And building that skill, that cultural intelligence, it starts with looking at yourself, your own assumptions, your own unwritten rules.
And then learning about others, being observant, asking questions, but always remembering to see the individual, not just a cultural label. Avoid those stereotypes.
It really boils down to combining that self-awareness with a genuine curiosity about the people you work with.
Okay, good stuff. Now, here's something to maybe think about this week, building on that idea of unwritten rules. Consider a place you know really well your team. Maybe a project group you've been in for ages. Could even be a hobby club. What's one rule there, one unspoken norm about how things are done that someone dropped in from a completely different background without that shared history might find totally baffling or really hard to figure out? What's an invisible tripwire in your familiar territory? Something to chew on.